In today's TED Talk, we are introduced to a positive aspect of suffering. For those who are in constant pain because of physical or psychological struggles, right now, this TED Talk could sound like a bunch of baloney. I'm to tell you right now that it's not. Just stay with us. Listen, when we are hurting because of hunger, physical pain, failure, embarrassment, fear, and phobias, dysfunctional relationships, stress, depression due to old age or poverty, the road to the freedom of accomplishing what our speaker appears to have accomplished just seems to be unattainable. I know it's what I would have thought during my recovery when I was injured quite a few years ago, back in the 70s, from an industrial accident, and I was recovering. I was given the opportunity today to reflect on any of the TED Talks in the series, and I chose this one without even seeing the speaker. I have experienced the truth of the title in my own life. The work which was involved over the years continues this day, and it gives me great joy to be able to share just a brief version of my own evolving when it comes to suffering. Scott Hamilton refers to eventually taking ownership of his suffering. When this is initiated, the first few pounds of extra weight dissolve from our shoulders, and the door to discovery opens. The speaker makes it a point that long-lasting results in getting stronger, and it takes a lot of effort. Initially, we can be enthusiastic in our evolving, hoping for a quick change or a quick cure. But unfortunately, complacency can also rear its ugly head as soon as it gets too difficult. Scott reminds us to remember the source of the power behind being chosen rather than being unwanted, and winning rather than losing. Giving thanks for those blessings on a daily basis is some of the work we are strongly encouraged to do. In fact, it's recommended. Even when everything seems to be under control, there is a certain tone of encouragement when someone can, without hesitation, introduce hope to someone who, because of illness, have succumbed to their suffering. Well, Scott speaks to us about his suffering in a detached way by describing everything he has gone through, as if the suffering is no longer part of his life. It's more like the pain's no longer a part of his life. Even though the events since birth were uncontrollable barriers in the normal development of a child, Scott is able to remember them without any resentment. They happened, and yet he only refers to his experiences as a reference to how far he has come. There is no resentment, and it's replaced by the acceptance and ownership of that suffering, that great suffering that he must have gone through. The past is the past, and yet every suffering moment has contributed to his thriving towards a stronger version of himself. His recovery program from suffering is so very similar to those of us who have been chosen to experience recovery with our own suffering. I cannot help but associating it with my own experience of having to admit to my own powerlessness, over people, places, and things. And my decision to work on reestablishing trust in God. From that, I was able to trust in those who understood my suffering. St. Luke refers to it as a gift which we can strive to imitate by our own actions eventually. In the tender compassion of our God, the dawn from on high shall break upon us to shine on those who dwell in darkness and the shadow of death, and guide our feet into the way of peace. Reaching the fork in the road, which results from our willingness to choose a better path, leads us to the evolving, which the speaker points to as one of the directions that we can take in our lives. This need to change can be so difficult for us to accomplish, especially on our own, especially at the beginning. Scott's examples of some of those people who understood what suffering really was all about made me reflect on my own need for God in my life. The problem, of course, was in trusting God to do for me what I couldn't do for myself. Kind of like when Scott refers to the trust he had for his skating coach, who was so wise, or his mother, who cared for him so lovingly. Like Scott, we listen and take in what we need to in order to evolve, a little bit at a time, and become stronger. God gives us the tools that we have to do and put them to good use. To say yes to this unconditional gift, it can lead us to a peace of mind where our suffering can be redirected to a higher purpose. The willingness of another person to share their suffering moments in life, allowed me to become free of that sense of being the only one suffering in the whole world, that isolation, suffering from addiction. When I was in my late 20s, this introduced me to gratitude, but also a whole new approach to living life. The strength which resulted in progress and not perfection continues today. That suffering episode in my life has given me all sorts of opportunities in living life rather than just surviving. In the explanation of the real suffering he experienced from birth until the present day, Scott Hamilton demonstrates the uniqueness of individual suffering, but also the common aspects of it, which makes us so similar in this divided world. In walking up the steps of each of our own recoveries from suffering, we are encouraged to evolve in accepting the encouragement of others, as well with God's grace, we can give back by being compassionate to others. Our speaker today, when referring to Mother Teresa, for example, of Calcutta, retells the opportunity of saving a soul with each person that we encounter. The power of that action itself is humbling, to say the least, but also necessary. The source of that new power, which we eventually can evolve to, can lead us to knowledge that Jesus suffered in a real way. It was for our sake. For us, his suffering during those 40 days and nights to the cross, we are given the opportunity during this Lenten season, to share in his divinity just as he humbled himself to share in our humanity. It is all a matter of trusting him enough to share and offer up our own and your own suffering. We are the living body of Christ. We are going to suffer. Most of the time, the suffering we endure is temporary, and the relief from it is welcomed, but so often forgotten. Today's TED Talk encourages us to remember and use our suffering in order to grow stronger physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually by respecting the source of that power with gratitude for our freedom. Thank you.